Let's do this thing, man. We've been talking about it long enough. Let's make this thing happen.
Yeah. Well, look, hey, Joe, Elijah, also not quite in shot, but assisting here. Pleased to meet you guys. My name is Jake from Harrison Audio, across the pond in the UK, working at the SSL headquarters. Thanks so much for joining me today. Yeah, so the purpose of the chat is really just to kind of keep things loose and talk about the heritage of Harrison Audio. Be great to kind of get your guys' perspective, seeming that you guys are based where the birth of Harrison kind of came from. You've had a lot of experience with Harrison as well. I got a little bit of a brief preface that I'd like to kind of go over just so we can kind of delve into it. And then, got a series of questions just to go by. How's that sound? All good?
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm excited. Cool. I've got a Sonic iced tea right here to keep us company, and there's some chocolate back there behind Elijah's head, so we are set.
Very nice. Well, you're beating me. I've got half a bottle of water here, so
there you go.
We'll work through that. Cool. So bear with me. So the story of Harrison Audio is deeply woven into the fabric of the golden era of recording, a period defined not by limitless choice, but by precision, commitment, and tools crafted for engineers who truly understood their art. When Harrison introduced the 3232 console in 1975, it was the world's first inline recording console. It marked a turning point in professional workflow, including recording and monitoring, that could finally happen through a single unified channel strip, revolutionizing how multi-track sessions were run in the studios. What set Harrison apart during this era was not only the innovation, but musicality. They were introducing transformer balanced preamps, the proportional EQ, which we'll talk about in a second. Characterful filters created that sound that was smooth, clear, and mix ready. I won't go through all of them, but we have some iconic records that went through recording and mixing through Harrison, including the famous Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, Electric Light Orchestra for Don't Let Me Down, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC's Highway to Hell, Stevie Wonder, Genesis, Blondie, ABBA, Queen, and so many others.
Fleetwood Mac, don't forget Fleetwood Mac.
Fleetwood Mac, which we're going to be talking about.
There you go.
Harrison's legacy is not just confined from the past of today. Harrison continues to evolve these principles, bridging decades of analog heritage with modern digital production. Their software ecosystem, including Mixbus, which we'll talk about today, and a growing collection of plugins. Finally, alongside digital innovation, Harrison also has reimagined a bunch of analog gear. So we'll be talking about the Harrison Mix Strip, which I'll be looking at for my session. And I believe for Joe, you've got the Harrison D510 box, which is the 500 series chassis, filled with a bunch of lovely, colorful gear in there. The expansion of the 500 series, including mic pre's, EQs, compressors, etc. That is my rant over. Joe, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Oh, glad to do it.
I guess the starting point question to you is just a bit about your thoughts and perspective of what is coined the golden era, particularly kind of the period of the 1970s. There's a lot of innovation happening, a lot of more psychedelic kind of art forms happening, all that kind of stuff. Technological advancements were happening, stuff. So question to you, what's kind of your impression of that 70s golden era sound?
Well, to me, one of the definitions would have been the fact that we think of the limitations of that era because we're in this DAW world where track count is massive. I get mixes in all the time that are 100 or approaching 100 or beyond, right? Sometimes just background vocals could be 60 tracks or something. But when we think of that era, at the time, they thought they were living in euphoria, right? Because all of a sudden 24 tracks, 16 track machines and 24 track machines, the ability to slave 24 track machines together and get track counts, even higher than that. Bigger consoles, like the Harrison, like in line to where that's a different topic all into itself. But they were when you think about them working in that era, they were in a whole new brave world, right? Compared like they were in the Wild West compared to where things had been prior. You know what I mean? They had a lot of more freedom. You talked about art forms that like psychedelic and more experimental. You think of you'd mentioned Led Zeppelin earlier, and some of the overdubs and various things that were happening in the track that wouldn't have been possible, or at least not easily done. I know we can talk about the Beatles and how you'd bounce everything down to mono, but see, they didn't even have to do that, right? So like the world could be wide stereo, and it was. I feel like when I listen to music from the 70s and the early 80s, I think it's funny because I think I approach it with a different visual than a lot of people. Instead of seeing it as limitations, I kind of put myself in that era of where they were coming from and seeing all the capabilities and possibilities that they had dropped on them at that they're the ones that were old enough to remember working in the 50s and 60s never knew, or you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like at the time they felt like they were really living the dream, if that makes any sense. So I feel like it was experimental, and track counts grew and things like that, to make music more complex in some ways because of the overdub world, but also still very analog, if that makes sense. Very, very analog tape, tape, and the transformers and the consoles and all those kind of stuff really marked the sound. It had a heavy sonic imprint on the sound for sure. Do you agree with that, Jake?
Absolutely. And I think kind of to tap into some of the actual music and, if we're talking about art form of the time, it's quite an interesting conversation about what musicians and engineers were limited to back in the day. Like you say, you could load up a Pro Tools session, you could have hundreds and hundreds of channels, you can create a bunch of insert points, all subgrouping, all different places. You've just got that almost overwhelming amount of opportunity to go through. Whereas back in the day, so talking about kind of channel count, right? So you've got your recording studio, you've got your live room, usually recording to tape, you're limited already there on the amount of channel count that you can get into, right? So you have to be quite logical about what your incoming signal is, right? And what I think that also has an effect on the actual performance as well. So being a guitarist myself, being a musician, you look at the sonic music structure of like records of 60s, 70s, 80s and stuff like that, and there's some incredible musicians where I get the impression that, of course there was easy enough to slice tape and make edits, but the performance was like a whole take, and if they didn't get it, they would do that whole take again. Whereas modern day, now you can punch in and you can almost like craft and build a song or a solo that can be super complicated and stuff like that because it's been so micro managed and edited and formulated that way. On that note, actually, how much of that method of recording, kind of committing on the way in, how important is that in today's world? Like you say, you've got these incredible DAWs and processes that can do all this kind of pretty hard, heavy work of creating your sound. Is there still relevance in having that kind of, I don't want to use the word simplified workflow because it's still quite complicated, but that approach of like committing to a sound and printing, do you think there's still kind of relevance within that today?
For me, absolutely. I still, a lot of us nowadays mix, we're kind of forced sometimes to mix in the DAW world, in the box, right? And so knowing that everything is going to be digital on the back end very often, to me, it's more important than ever to have the transformers and the tubes and all the good stuff on the front end. And to me, it's that, like, if I get the front end sound right on the way in, going through all the real gear, all the little tolerance differences from, strip to strip, and just all that kind of stuff is actually, good in that regard. Then the end product can stay digital and be better for it. I mean, I can hear a difference when everything is done on the front end the right way through great high quality gear. It's night and day. Plus, not only that, it's the way the musicians are inspired during the session. for example, I get to work with, being here in Nashville, you can imagine I get to work with legendary session guitar players all the time.
Yeah.
Brent Mason, that name comes to mind.
Yeah.
He's one of the most recorded
I do,
guitar players of all time. And, anytime you're in the control room, you look out and you see him setting out there, it's gonna be a good day. But that said,
you just sit back with like your popcorn and just like enjoy the show.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, literally. No, even though I've been doing this so long, there are days when you're still a fanboy, and I feel like everybody in the room is a fanboy at you know what I mean, and that's a good thing. When they get to the studio and they say, "Oh my God, there's like even though a guy's been doing it for 15 years, there he is, there's the man." So it's inspirational. It's inspirational. Absolutely. But all that to say, the sounds that are happening in the headphones in the moment affect the way the artist feels when they play their instrument and when they sing and all that good stuff. So when the singer steps up in front of a great microphone, going through a great preamplifier and all, it's like, I can't tell you how often I get the, wow, what this sounds, the phones sound great, from artists that are used to working only at home with whatever they, normally have when they come into a real studio and we drop them in front of that, chain. It's a big deal to them. Plus, for me, like on guitars, I'm a big fan. I know you can take a DI, and sometimes we do, and deal with it later. I really don't prefer that. I want the guitar player, I want to capture what they do, which means that their stomp boxes, their head, when they decide, a lot of times they have multiple head setups, right? They may have a couple of them that they can choose from. Knowing when somebody of that caliber wants to switch to that head, to hit their cabinet, which is, they've already got their cabinet. I mean, their ecosystem is so dialed in. Yeah. Like if they want to throw a little slap delay on something, a little reverb, I want it. I want the sound of them. I don't want to make all those decisions later. It's not because I'm being lazy. It's because no one knows better how to make a guitar sound than somebody of that caliber. So why should I second guess that with a DI track later? If that makes any sense. Sometimes it can rescue something that went wrong, or but for the most part, I want to get the drum sounds sounding great going through, like you were talking about the channel strips, for example. We've been using a lot of the 4K Revival and the Harrison 32Cs lately, which both have a Jensen transformer loaded front end. So the drummers, it's like you start dialing things in, and you ask them, how's it sounding in the phones? They're like, freaking awesome. It's like they're going to play great because the phones sound fire. Same with the guitar player, same with the bass player, same with the singer. Everyone's going to up their game when everything is captured at an optimum level, to me.
It's interesting to hear you say that because, again, so much of what I try and strive for, not just a musician, but if I'm working with like bands and artists for recording, it's all about the performance, right? And I'm sure you've had your fair share of experience of people, all walks of life, walking in someday, somebody's feeling really good and they're ready, they're pumped, stuff like that. The other time, people are feeling a bit cold, and it's kind of, what can you do to help get the best performance out of the artist, right? And
right.
Not really anything related towards what the physical performance of what you're going to get out of that guitarist or that vocalist or that drummer, but how much that can benefit their own performance from hearing it back, and they're hearing it through these Jensen pre's, and again, talking about Harrison, the EQ personally I'm a massive fan of, sound great on guitars as well. So that's quite a cool tool to use to push back the sound. Say, hey, look, this is you, but it's sounding amazing that way. So yeah, I really like that.
It's a real thing. You hear the musicians that do this all day, every day, talk about their favorite studios, their favorite engineers, rooms. Sometimes you hear them talk about their, let's say, less favorite engineers and less favorite rooms and all that kind of stuff. And all that to say that, one of the tie-ins to the great is the rooms that not only have an acoustic space that's great or a vibe that's inspirational, but also great sounding gear. Because when that bass, in their hands or in their cans sounds like $1 million, they're going to play like $1 million. You know, that whatever threshold of talent that player's at, whether it's a high school kid that's doing his first recording, all the way up to the session all-stars that we have in Nashville, they're gonna up their game because they're inspired. I mean, you hear it. They tell me this all the time. I'm not making this up. I mean, this is stories. This is communications I've had with great players, you know, hundreds of times over my career.
And it's like rewarding, right? To hear that, like,
oh,
you know,
yeah,
somebody genuinely feels like, hey, I love working with you. I want to come back. You know, not just good to you know, up the bank account, you know, but it's actually nice to build that relationship with an artist, because again, it's such a personal thing, right? You know, they're pouring their heart and soul. That kind of segues onto another talking point, talking about kind of Harrison being involved. You're obviously, you know, got so much experience in small and large format recordings. I've seen a couple of pictures of you looking pretty tired, having like manuscript scores, recording sessions of the desks, and you know, so you've had so much experience working with all kind of walks of life within music. So when it comes to talking gear, right? One of the questions I think is important, people want to know, is about when to choose the right piece of equipment. So when you're starting a mix or recording or production, what sort of guides your choice of tools? Is it to do with the genre? Is it specific to the artist? Or is it kind of like your natural instincts? Again, just within experience.
Well, the number one would be natural instincts. You kind of learn what pieces have certain transformers, certain tonal qualities, and what instruments that works on. So the same with microphones. You know, you find out this microphone has got a bright top end. This microphone has kind of got a muted round top end. All of those things combined, and you build this. Let's call it a template, because that's really what it is. Sure. Moving forward to where on tracking days you go in and you set up your thing, and you are all before they ever play a note, you're literally already shaping the final mix by choices on microphones and things. Now, I will say occasionally it does get genre specific. When you say artist specific, yes, because it's genre specific. So not necessarily the artist, but the genre that they're doing. So sometimes we'll switch. You know, let's say something that's really open, natural, and full detailed. Like let's say your new you're not the Revival 4K, but the 9K, right? It's so linear in frequency response, up even octaves above what we can hear. So I'm getting that full range thing. But then there's days where you're working on a jazz track, or, you know, something real organic, and you're like, that piano can't be full range today. It's got to be very, you know, it's got to be opposite of full range. So that's the days we may take a more of a vintage style tube preamp and run the piano through that instead. And we may even still run it through something like the EQ in the 9K, like in line level input, and you can use the roll off. You know, so you even make the piano darker than the tube pre, and the microphones that we chose, we can even make it darker than that if we need to, if that makes sense. Sure. So you kind of you kind of build a template, and sometimes you alter it based on genres, for sure.
We were talking about kind of committing to a sound, and you're talking about that vintage sound of working within specific genres and artists and stuff like that. So is it easier for you to say, hey, look, I know that you know, let's talk about the 500 series chassis from Harrison. You've got a couple of their 32C preamps into EQs. Is that just something that you're happy to kind of commit to, or is it kind of that fumbling around of a different sound to spend longer to integrate that sound that you're looking for?
No, that's a solid question, and I think I know what you mean by it, and I have a couple different answers. Number one, with how wide my toolbox is or isn't, or what I would suggest for anyone else that's out there in an earlier part of their career than where I'm at in mine now. For me, where I'm at, I'm in Nashville, and I'm in a lot of different genres. When I say I'm in Nashville, that's kind of one of the music hubs of the biggest music hubs of the world. Everyone thinks traditionally of country music, but it's just a fraction of what we do here nowadays. We do modern pop, vintage sounding pop. We do blues. We do rock. We do hip hop. We do, a lot of the big orchestral work from around the world has been filtering here. You're in one of the orchestral headquarters, near London. Of course, that's.
Yeah.
But in the United States, a lot of it has left the West Coast and the East Coast and moved here. We're talking about film scores, video games, traveling, like Broadway style shows. We do video games, we do Broadway shows, we do all that stuff here, which Nashville wouldn't have been doing 20 years ago. I mean, things have changed a lot. It's like, where are you going with this story? I'm going with the fact that I need a wide, personally, because I'm working in so many different genres and chasing so many different clientele, and to their final signature sonic palette that they desire. Sure. I feel like I need a big set of tools, which suits me very, very well because I freaking love analog gear. And the more of it that I can own makes me even happier and happier and happier. Now, that said, we all have friends. I'm sure you do, and I do as well, that make their living particularly in one genre, right? Like one kind of style. Like those guys, think about some of those guys back in the 2000s that made a killing doing all the acoustic, like folk thing. Remember when that, like Mumford and Sons and all that kind of stuff got really, really
Blew
big?
up. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The guys that made their living doing like Nirvana, basically like that template moving forward.
Sure.
So they can have a smaller, I feel like they can get by with and even thrive with a smaller toolbox, right? They find, it's like, okay, you're sitting in front of a 32C console, right? But like that becomes their, let's say they buy that, they have that. And that becomes the sonic signature of their studio and their vibe and their music and the genres that they deal with. That's not a bad thing. Like it becomes their signature. Where some of us can't really have a signature. I can't, right? If I have a signature, I'm going to lose half my clientele because, that's not what we're going after. But that's how I make my living, and some of the of our other friends make their living in a smaller box. And I don't mean that in a negative way, right? Like that they're thriving in that area. So I feel like the smaller toolbox is not only in that situation could not only be it could be a strength, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? Because they're so known for their signature thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, for sure.
And to kind of, for my understanding of that, so yeah, of course, if you're working within a multitude of genres, and it's really cool to hear somewhere like Nashville is just popping with, a whole new, diaspora of music, of people coming in and like you say, film scoring, that probably wasn't as big there, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I see your point about having a wide variety of tools to use. In today's world, when we talk about plugins, and I'm sure if you go through your Pro Tools or your Ableton, Mixbus, Logic plugins list, and you look for the EQs, bang, you're just hit with hundreds, if not thousands of different, EQs and plugins to use. So again, it's kind of to know when to use your favorite thing. And I'm sure that applies exactly to artist specific, genre specific, but then also workload, right? So turnover, right? You might only have a day or a couple of days to get this mix over. So there's another nice little segue here, talking a bit about Harrison's kind of integration into the digital side of things. So you've worked with the 32 Classic, and you've also done some work with the 32C plugin from Harrison. And so just from your perspective, your ears, how close does that experience feel to working with the original hardware? Because, a lot of people, when companies are trying to do analog and hardware emulations of products, they're trying to get their DSP, their THD as close as they can to emulate what was happening through tube boxes and stuff like that. So the fact that you've had experience on both analog plugin side of things, what are some of the similarities between the two?
Well, EQ wise, they're extremely similar, and because I don't have a 32C console, but I had I'm in Nashville where they're headquartered, and so the the big 32C console that used to travel around the country, around the world actually, doing trade shows. They dropped it off at my studio for a couple months so we could play with it and film content and all that kind of. I was hoping it would work out. We could, we could purchase one, and maybe we still will eventually. But because we had a blast with it. We didn't get to track with it. We got to just mix. But I do have 4. Okay. I did purchase back when they first came out 32. 4 of the 32C channel strips as well.
Cool.
And of course the plug-in. So all that to say that the EQ is, I would say, very, very similar. The EQ, the Harrison EQ, if not, anyone that's not played with it, you should. It's a very unique tool. Really, there's nothing else quite like it. There's some similarities with some other hardware boxes I've played with, but it's very unique. I would call it soft, which is a signature of 70s EQs, right? Sure. For its day. It actually had a lot of gain, right? I think it was. I'm trying to remember of how much many dBs per of boost. I think maybe it's 10. I can't remember.
Yeah. I've got plus minus 10.
Yeah. So when you compare it to some other things before it, before they were, you got to remember a lot of the consoles before it were like MCI. Was and a lot of like custom stuff, and when you talk to engineers that worked in that era a lot, like you had to max out, like when you were tracking, you had to max out the frequency, boost, the treble boost basically, because you were going to a darker, but they were extremely soft anyway, so you had to max it out, and you were going to tape, which was darkening up it again, and then it'd come to the mix process, and you would have to max it out again. Right, to make it you just brighten it. You're just doing everything. So when that came out, when the Harrison came out, and it already had, it was probably a next level. It's like, wow, like this EQ is jumping. But by today's standards, like especially comparing it to an SSL, it's softer. But that's what I actually like about it. Like I can go in there on that top band and turn it all the way up, which is I think 10 kilohertz, and just crank it, like literally crank it all the way.
Absolutely.
And 10 dB of it is not too much because it's kind of it's a softer tool, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. When you make kind of subtle strokes, the cue is quite broad, right? So it's just kind of giving like a wider coverage, should I say, of that frequency band. Whereas now if you're boosting it, let's say 10 dB, it's starting to narrow that cue. But it's not unpleasant. Again, I will play a little bit in a second on it, but it can be very musical, which I know is such an overused term to describe something within the audio world. But
it's very true. Yeah. There are EQs that are surgical and are capable of massive amounts of bottom end and top. The 9K. 9K is a beautiful example of that. I mean, the amount of high frequency content you could get out of a 9K circuit if you wanted it is all, you know what I mean? Like you could be bleeding from the ears. It's capable of doing that. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying it's capable, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas the circuitry of the Harrison is, the term musical. There's certain pieces of gear that you can put on something and you can twist knobs, and for whatever reason it just kind of always, like, no matter what you do, it's like it sounds better than it did before I was passing through this circuit. A Pultec, right? A Pultec is a classic example of that EQ. It's like just turn the knobs anywhere and turn knobs, and it's like, wait a minute, this I don't know why, but it's something is better now no matter what I do. And I kind of feel like the Harrison EQ is in that, it's in that category of
nice.
So the term musical is I think very fitting, actually. I really do. I don't think it's an over. I mean, I know it's an overused term, but there's times when it's actually accurate.
Yeah,
and in this case,
I'll work on my my vocabulary a little bit in the audio world. But
right.
In
this case, musical and Harrison EQ to me are one and the same. I really, absolutely. Right. But my experience working with the plug-in is that the EQ is very, very similar. However, it also goes beyond what the console and the hardware did, because we have a gate and we have a compressor In fact, we have 3 different flavors of compressor. Like different levels of how intense and how fast the attack is and stuff. We have, and I don't remember, but I think it's called leveler, compressor, and then limiter. Exactly. And the attack times and release times and ratios and stuff move with that. And so that's that. Yeah. So in certain ways, it goes beyond the hardware, right? I mean, it 100%. Truly does.
For what I've been playing around, so for the leveler, a vocal duck, just to keep things kind of, not necessarily compressed, but in check, so you're offering this most subtle amount of compression. Middle of that, you're getting into compression where you can now have a bit more of a heavier side of gain reduction. And then with the limiting, I think goes up to, proper brick wall limiting. So nothing's getting past that. So again, within the plugin side of things, which is, far and beyond what the hardware can do, you've now got a lot of versatility. So actually talking about, you like to have this toolbox and variety of stuff like that. Is that useful to have kind of within the GUI, just like to have those ranges, or do you prefer to kind of have different things doing like a unique kind of tool or a job, should I say that way?
I'm so glad you asked that because I'm a channel strip guy. I'm old enough that I came up on analog consoles, and you get used to the fact that right there is kind of everything you really need, right? That doesn't mean you don't have an 1176 or 3 or an LA2A or 2 or 3 in the rack behind you for certain things here and there. But the console itself, let's talk about the 4K, right? Okay.
Sure.
It could do everything. I mean, you could, in theory, even the bus compressor, right? With a couple reverb units, make your album with nothing else, right? Because every channel had dynamics, every channel had EQ, filters. Like it's just mind blowing, and I still like that workflow. I really do. Like I'm known even in my in the box mixing template. Not even when I'm working on hardware, but when I'm mixing inside of the DAW, to have channel strips virtually on every channel. Does that mean that I won't use put an 1176 on the bass guitar? Now, of course I will. But I also use a ton of like channel strips dynamics. I really do. Yeah. Even if I'm, combining it with something else, just the way let's call it our forefathers, our founding fathers, were known to, on an SSL console, be tickling the lights on the compressors, all over the place, right? It was just a way of mixes got louder and punchier than ever before, moving into like the 80s, for example, when those consoles started dominating. And so I still work that way even inside the box because it's a sound that I still think we can't beat. I mean, maybe you can do things differently, but I don't think it's better. So I still like to have one GUI open, and if it didn't, here's the thing though, Jake, is if it didn't sound good, I wouldn't do it. Right? It's not because he's being lazy. He just wants to open one plugin.
Yeah.
No, I really feel like it sounds great too. Like I still feel like there's a reason why every software manufacturer in the world still wants to copy Harrison EQs, SSL EQs, SSL dynamics, because they're still that relevant today.
So again, talking about like hardware integration, users out there, you might just be working in the box. You might be having a hybrid. Hell, there's still people that work solely analog, which is impressive these days, I think, just to have that sole analog element. But the fact that you can just dump, 8 or 16 instances of the Harrison 32C plugin, and you've got a console, right? So, and especially if you are familiar with the SSL U series controllers, like the UF8 for faders, UF1 is the kind of single fader, mostly for DAW navigation and stuff, and then the UC one, which is a dedicated plugin mixer with the SSL link plugin that can host third-party plugins. You can now map that. So again, having that tactile approach, but still, so analog kind of tactile feel, energy and vibe, but still it's all in the box. And I just think as an insert, that's brilliant. You know, you can just have your Harrison desk at home, which is awesome.
You can create your dream console nowadays. You know, is
Exactly.
it the same as the analog mixing experience? That's a different argument. But inside the DAW, we can say, you know what, I want 4KE on all of my drums except for the overheads in the rooms, and I want the 9K. Now I want the 32C on the bass. Now let's look at the guitars. I want, like, you know, we can build our dream console right there inside of our DAW, and just kind of save that as our template moving forward. You know, and we can make different decisions on different days as the music inspires us, and something is working or isn't working. You know, it's like I need an EQ. You know, the 9K isn't working. We'll switch over to the 32C. You need that softer edge thing. But then again, you may have the 32C by default on that. It's like, you know what, this needs to hit harder today, so I'm going to have to bring up the 9K or something. You know what I mean?
100%. Totally,
you know, which has more, when I say hit harder, you know, you can go to more extremes, of course, and get more surgical or whatever the case may be. So, not that that's good or bad. It's just different. And that's the whole idea. That's what I'm talking about. Building your dream console that can be flexible for every day. You know, it's pretty cool. I mean, that's honestly the way I work day in, day out. It really is.
Yeah. You hear stories of like engineers back in, you know, we're talking about the 70s, but throughout the decades building what's called the Frankenstein console, right? Which is just a shell casing filled with some components that are original and the rest are not so original. You know? So it's about building this kind of machine, and yet you just have, like you say, you can build a template, and then you can just automatically load your drum bus, your vocal chain, you know, stem out 20 instances of Harrison 32, 4KB, 4KE channel strips and stuff like that. I think what's quite cool relating to SSL is, you know, they do an amazing job with their digital ecosystem with things like 360. So again, you know, you can, and also what's awesome is Harrison 32 is also part of that integration as well. So you can now have all of those controls, have a separate screen or a door window, which is effectively like your virtual console. And then everything is like plug-in ways is rooting in your Pro Tool sessions. So that's awesome.
And I've got the UC1 that you mentioned, so I can still dial in per channel as I bring up. I want to twist on the kick drum. I want to twist on the bass guitar and twist on the electric. I'm literally twisting. I'm not. I don't have to. I don't. You know, honestly, and I've said this in other interviews. The least amount of time I can spend with this guy right here in my hand, the better. You know, if I can use real knobs, I'm all for it. I'm a big proponent of the UC1. Big fan.
Great. I'm glad that we can endorse you on that comment for the UC1. So.
Take that and use it as you will.
So the final thing, we'll probably listen to some audio in a sec, but final thing just on the topic of it's really great to hear, like, again, your experience. I know you don't have the 32C available at the moment, but you've had some experience and you've done some mixes on it. You've heard the sound of it. It's really interesting to hear that, you know, you're getting some really good quality, similar results with the plug-in version of the EQ. And it's nice to hear that, you know, working that workflow of a channel strip of just having everything available is, you know, appeals to you. Do you find that modern producers still respond to what we're coining that kind of classic vintage sound from Harrison, even if the genres didn't exist back in the 70s? So, you know, a lot of producers today that are working in modern pop, hip hop, electronic music and stuff like that, with these genres not existing back in the time, do you think there's still that relevance of having that kind of, again, using buzzwords here, but that musical sonic kind of sound of the 70s in today's productions? Absolutely.
I still think that, because possibly more than ever, honestly, Jake, is, you know, because at the time, you know, you got to remember, depending on what era we're talking about, we were still printing to analog tape. You know, like even if they were using digital tape in the tracking, maybe, you know, depending on what era you're talking about. But then when they would mix it down, the final mix down would go to analog. You know what I mean? Like, the analog was still such a part of everything we did for so many decades. And of course now it's not, right? Everything is in a DAW that is so clean and precise, and I'm just going to say it's sterile. On its own, it is sterile. It just is. That does. I don't mean that in a bad way, because we can flavor it, the way we want to, right? We're not stuck with the sound of a Studer or an MCI tape machine or whatever. We're not stuck with any of that. But mixes that are going through emulations, if you don't have real hardware, if they're going through software emulations of real transformers and real tubes, real circuitry, the analog EQs. I'm a big believer in that. For example, I have and use and love the SSL digital EQ. Right, it's great. There's a lot of companies that make those kind of things. Fab Filter, even like Avid and Logic have their flavorless vanilla EQ. It's like, this is what 4K sounds like, and it probably actually is true to what 4K sounds like. But what I love about going in and using channel strips, that plugins that like the Harrison and the 4KE, the 9K, is that 4K doesn't just sound like 4K. 4K has a little salt and pepper added to it, a little paprika, right? because it was going, it's modeling an analog circuit that had transformers, capacitors, IC chips. I mean, various things, right? Op amps. There was an analog sound that kind of blurred the lines in a pleasing way, right? And sometimes you just put it on one track, and it's just like, yeah, okay, that's cool, right? I mean, I can hear a little difference between that and the digital DAW tool.
Absolutely.
But then, okay, multiply that by 32. Okay, multiply that by 64, because we were talking earlier about how track count is getting massive, right? So by using all these analog emulations, even though they're digital tools, they're analog emulations of great hardware from the past, or even current hardware. I feel like my mixes are night and day better, because I've got to blur those lines somehow. There's not many of genres that are not improved by not being that sterile. There are a few, hip hop tracks every once in a while here and there where the separation and isolation of digital like kind of work well, right? And I think the reason it works well is because that's what our ears are used to hearing, because that's when that genre happened, in the technology of that day. But most other music, whether it's country, pop, and just across the board that has real instruments, still our ears they're not ready for that sterile vanilla cold thing. They still want to hear whatever seasoning, whatever spices that analog circuitry was adding. I feel like that's a big part of my sound. Even mixing in the box is the fact I'm loading my template up with analog inspired tools. I've got, like, for example, I've got your Fusion. I say SSL. I know I've got the Fusion box right here in the Bus Plus, right? So to me, two of the greatest pieces of all time. When I'm mixing completely in the box, I have the software versions of it. I mean, we can argue all day about, is it 100%? The plugins 100% is good, 90% is good. I'm over that argument personally. But when I'm mixing in the box, I still want that, right? So I have it in plugin form, and they're all over my mixes, that kind of stuff. And I think that's part of the reason I stay so busy is people like my mixes. Well, if people like my mixes, partially it's because, it's taste and flavor, all experience and all that kind of stuff matter too. But also, I think my in the box template and all the coloration I'm doing is a big part of that. I really do.
So what I've got here is a mix bus session. This is the track that I wrote for the Harrison Tape Saturator plugin. I'll play a little bit first. I'll talk a bit about my recording within it, what I went to do for some mixing into the final stage. We were talking about the Harrison 32C plugin, and I've also got the Harrison 32 series mix strips, a pair of them sat just the side of me. Little kind of brief overview about experience on Mixbus. And I know yourself, Joe, you've played around with it. We were talking a bit about the Atmos and binaural renderer, which is really cool. So the one thing that I really rate and respect about Harrison Mixbus compared to other DAWs, Joe, I think you were mentioning once in a video about how sometimes you can feel like you're working in autopilot, especially like all those Pro Tools users that you've got your templates out there, and same with Logic and Ableton and stuff like that. Whereas Mixbus, there's a bit of a learning curve, which actually is a kind of a homage to actually the signal chain and signal workflow of working on consoles, right? The routing is really cool. So again, in the name Mixbus, what you have here within your sends section is everything that I can route with. I have my groups for drums, percussion, bass, acoustic guitars, electric, synths, all that kind of stuff. And I can have them routing to their respective bus, right? So again, it just follows this nice kind of analog renaissance of working on a console, but with the virtual emulation of that way. Anyway, enough of me talking. Let's hear a bit of the track that I wrote for the Harrison Tape Saturator plugin. I'll talk a bit about how I kind of processed it, recorded, mixed, and then we'll kind of go that way. Try and do a little fade out.
Yeah. Well, you know, hey, the 70s were all about the fade outs, right?
Absolutely. I think they need to bring more fade outs.
Yeah.
I like the ones where have you seen, I've heard a lot in modern productions where like the fade out and the fade in of the next track is kind of almost like this seamless.
Yeah.
It's almost like kind of this one thing. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I actually heard that.
Anyways,
I watched
yeah.
your announcement video a week ago. I'm trying to remember exactly when that announcement was made for the Tape Saturator plugin. So I actually heard that and watched your video. So it's a cool groove, man.
Again, I was given a brief. Hey, you're gonna be help promote this new Tape Saturator plugin from Harrison. Come up with the scripting for it all and to kind of the story behind, you know, where does tape come from?
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of got me into thinking, you know, again, we're talking about that vintage 70s golden era sound. So I wanted to try and do something that at least kind of paid respects to that, but then also had a bit more of a modern flair to it. With the drums that I have here, recorded it with a good friend, Reese, who also works at SSL, an amazing drummer. In the video, you'll see the footage that we got some nice lighting. There's the tape machine going, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was actually all tracked through an SSL 18, which is in the backdrop. And the only processing on the recording way in is the magic SSL 4K button, which adds some nice kind of, you know, subtle saturation, a bit of a top end lift. And that was just on the snare. So we just managed to kind of get the recording is tight, you know, again, that deadbeat snare, just no sustain on it. Reese was putting a couple of tablecloths and cushions on the toms and the snare. We put a massive pillow or a coat or something like that in the kick. So yeah, I suppose what we'll do is maybe just kind of hear the drums. But what I'll do is maybe chuck on the Harrison plugin. And then what I've got here is an insert send to the Harrison mix strips. And so bear with me, but I'll try and kind of do a nice A-B comparison of hearing kind of what we can achieve here. Cool, just the drums. Cool. This kind of goes case in point what we're talking about. You can see on my screen I've got 6 dB of 60 hertz, which, you know, that's an insane amount of low end kind of coming through that. But the thing is, it's not overpowering to me. It's just actually kind of just putting a bit more emphasis, a bit more weight, a bit more meat on the kind of sub frequencies, low frequencies of the recorded kit. So that's really emphasizing the kick drum. Personally, I love to have a little bit more low end in the snare. I think there's a lot of body in the snare. The toms, obviously, when we rotate, if we try just on the actual tom section right here, just adds that really nice kind of low end thump that I think are actually quite a lot of the time are present in kind of older records and stuff like that. So what I'll try and do now, a bit of a science experiment, is to see if I can maybe match these settings that I've got here into my insert that I've got right here. If we remind ourselves of what the Harrison plugin is, like I say, in the low end, I've just boosted up 60 hertz at 6 dB, which is pretty crazy, as well as the top end. Let's move that to about 3 dB at you know, just over 6K. So that's what this sounds like. Cool. And so what I'll do is I'll now bypass the Harrison plugin, and now with the settings that I have on my mix strip, hopefully quite difficult to take a second to do a direct A/B comparison between the plugin there and stuff. We've got some latency going on and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I'm very soon gonna come into the market of buying some of these mix strips for that one.
Well, you know, it's undeniable. I mean, people, you know, argue about DAW versus analog and stuff all the time, and I think I even mentioned earlier, I'm kind of over that debate because you have to do what you have to do when you have to do it, right? There's workflows that suit one versus the other, deadlines and various things that cause us to have to mix completely in the box sometimes, or whatever the case may be. But let me just say, the punch of analog is something that you can't argue it. And I know a lot of our friends out there, because of their age and what has happened over the last 20 years in the DAW world versus analog world and everything, a lot of people haven't got to experience it. But when you sat down at a desk like the one right behind you, the 32C, because I had the privilege of mixing on one for a few months recently, and things just jump.
Yeah.
There's a different punch, there's a different jump, there's a different thing. Doesn't mean you can't get great results in the box. That's not the argument. I'm just going to say there's a very real analog mojo magic thing that's still 100%. In existence. When you use one and side by side with the other, every once in a while, you forget, and then you sit down and you mix on a 4K or something, and you're like, oh yeah. I remember this extra dimension of, you forget.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. What I'd also like to do, if it's all right, so we had it on the drums. I'm a big acoustic guitar player and a fan of just the sound of acoustic guitars. And so if I play from here, coming into the main chorus of it all. So again, I just love how kind of quickly, just the decision and the commitment, like, hey, I'm just going to boost like, what is that? 5 dB, around 5-6 hertz. And again, 6 kilohertz, should I say. And again, it's not doing these gigantic, massive band pushes at the moment because it's a proportional cue. It's just narrowing it a bit. So actually, again, it kind of evokes that nice musical sense that we've got. What I'd love to kind of talk about lastly is the Harrison Tape Saturator. Obviously, this is kind of the main point of the song. So what this tape machine is based off is the kind of final reel-to-reel 2-track tape machine that you would have in your master tape recording. Again, there's a whole other video you can watch I talk about, but very quickly, we've got the fidelity and tape speed, which have a massive impact on the actual frequency spectrum. Fidelity of best is like the best quality of magnetic tape that you could have. It's quite literally out of the packaging, out of the wrapper. And then going to low quality, I imagine that's some tape found in the trash can or the bin that's been stepped on. It's been, spilt coffee all over. It's been re-recorded, rewritten so many times. Tape speed is, as you can see in the GUI, is inches per second. So how quickly the revolutions of the tape head goes round, stuff like that. And what this does is as a faster IPS. So again, 60 IPS is actually not very typical. It'd be quite rare. Typically, you would have 30 inches per second. Revolutions of that is where you would find on tape recorders. But ideally, the faster the tape heads is going to have a wider frequency response and a wider frequency range. It will also preserve transients, so you'll have a bit more of a cleaner sound. And then I believe 1 7/8 IPS is what you get in your cassette tapes, right? So this is kind of super low quality, not low quality, should I say, but very slow. This will round off a lot of the top end. A lot of your bottom end will not sound as tight and controlled. It'll be a bit more loose. And particularly if you have these two low settings, you can start to get into some vintage vibe as well. what you were hearing there was playing around with the different fidelity, tape speed, the drive function as well. And what that's really equating, you can see, geez, these are really flashing, these LEDs hitting in the red. So I'm really just overdriving the preamp effectively of the tape machine right here. And what that's doing is that's just rounding off all the transients. And it's a really cool example of using a mixing technique, you know, to add color and saturation that way. What we've got here in the flutter, dropouts, and the hiss are all kind of the artifacts and modulations you would get. You know, you were talking about your tape machine, Joe. From doing that, were you kind of experiencing like the artifacts and the little intricacies, the idiosyncrasies of kind of what tape can do and how it kind of affects the sound that way?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you know, you definitely change the IPS, right? I mean, you know, that has the inches per second, like 15 and 30, and even the, you know, some tape machines like this one, well, they can't see me, but the one behind me, it does 7 and 3. And then we got a Revox that does 15 and 7. And that's a big effect, you know, the frequency response, transients for sure. And, and another thing, I know you were doing it, and it was in the moment it was goofy, but for those that's paying attention, you know, that flutter, you know, that's a useful thing, you know, that kind of stuff. It really is, like, as an effect. You wouldn't, you know, necessarily put your whole mix, you know, just make that your preset that you go to. But nonetheless, you think about a piano or synth or something, a B3 part that you really want to just do something, you know, a loop even. You want to do something twisted on. Having the flutter, the wow and flutter thing, I've used those artistically, you know, as artistic decisions. It's two extremes, like you were doing, you know, just showing how it's useful. It can be. It really, you know,
absolutely
not as your
and
two
as you
mix final
mentioned-
master, but as an insert point. You know, it's a cool thing.
Yeah, hopefully people will realize I don't normally put this much dropout, flutter, and drive on your mixes. So don't worry. So final thing to kind of say, like, trying to put together this track of music that really envisioned a bit of the sound and tone of what Harrison was doing back in the 70s, but having a bit more of a modern flair to it. And with that, I was using a collection of the Harrison 32C plugin, a bunch of 4K stuff. I was using the mix strips that we've got right there, and obviously the tape saturator. So I hope you enjoyed.
No, I especially the drum, the drum fill at the very beginning. Your buddy obviously has listened to She's a Brick House. You remember that from the 70s?
You know what? He's going to be so pleased you say that, because I think in the tracking session, he said, like, hey, that's this song, right? So, we...
That the first thing you pick up on is like, oh, that's awesome. But what a great groove. And he's obviously a great drummer.
All you're doing is just you're making his head get bigger. You're fueling his ego.
Well, you can cut this, maybe mute this part or something. So
I'll send it to him separately.
Yeah.
So Joe, you've heard enough of what I've been showing you through Mixbus. It'd be great to hear from yourself. I believe you've got a Pro Tools session with a track that you put together. It's got quite a cool story to it, I think, as well. So, and also some of the outboard and kind of mix workflows. So what have you got for us?
Well, I had a friend that needed to get a couple tracks cut back in December, and we ended up just making it a day to where we could, I had just gotten in already had 4 Harrison 32Cs, but I didn't have any of your 9K or your 4K yet. So I got in some of the 4Ks and the 9Ks, and I already had your SSL Octo Pure Drive. So I was like, hey, let's do nothing but SSL capture. Like every preamp on this record is SSL. And then I can use it for content purposes. So I actually paid the studio players to play some songs for me. For example, on my YouTube just last weekend or recently, I released a Fleetwood Mac remake of the song Dreams, Stevie Nicks singing, so they can go download those tracks and actually hear the 4K, the 9K, the Harrison, and the Octo. And I did a blues boogie, kind of like think of Stevie Ray Vaughan. I did a couple weeks ago. I did one of those, and there's more songs to come. But this is one that is on the to come list. And I told the guys, I was like, I always love that Daft Punk song, Get Lucky. So let's do, kind of a disco kind of groove kind of thing, and just make it just a few minutes long, no lyrics, just an instrumental. So they did. And so knowing that we were going to do this, I literally mixed this in about 10 minutes by keeping it simple, literally. You'll see I put the tape saturator as the first input on every track, high and 15. Pretty much the default, I think. Mm-hmm. And then I followed that with the 32 classic channel strip and just EQ'd if and when necessary. And that's the only channel strip, except for fun. I did drop in a little chorusing from the slate, that's part of your complete access bundle, a little chorusing on the bass just to see what it sounded like from the Dimension D. And then on the stereo bus, we have a little 32 drive, your SSL bus compressor, and this sort of the settings is auto and 10, and then just just a meter for me to see how hard I was hitting the stereo bus. Cool. Then I'm also pretending as if I'm hitting a 30 IPS best quality, which is pretty invisible, but for the stereo bus, then I have a couple little reverbs and delays here going. But this is really quickly thrown together, so don't judge me, guys, too much. But there's a couple things I want to talk about. I'll let you hear the groove for a second. Okay, so you get the idea. It's just kind of the dancey disco kind of thing. But I'm going to show you a couple things real quick. What I'll do is, let's just mute the reverbs and delays because who that's not what we're here to talk about. But I'm going to mute all the processing except for the stereo bus. Just forgive me for that. But so no EQ and no tape saturation. And let's go up to somewhere where the band is actually playing. So that's just the raw processing that we did on the tracking day, meaning by selecting if we're going to use the Harrison, the 9K, the 4, which is the 9K, of course, it doesn't have the transformer on the front end, although you do have the VHD option. The 4K has the Jensen, and the Pure Drive has, the kind of like the VHD basically. So we chose preamplifiers accordingly and did EQ some to tape, mostly cutting, just making it a really clean raw recording for you guys to when you download the multi-tracks, you can kind of take the mix in a certain direction. I didn't paint them too far in a corner. But what I'll do is I'm going to hit play one more time with it raw, and you'll hear just the preamplifiers doing what the preamplifiers do, and then I'll insert the processing, okay? So now that'll give you a flavor of the Harrison channel strip, kind of what it did. And do you have any questions for me at this point, Jake, or should I just keep going?
When you kind of came into the recording stage again, sound like a broken record here, but kind of committing to a sound. So it's interesting to kind of hear about a lot of your EQ choices was just about cutting and stuff like that. So when you kind of came to prepare this recording, did you have the vision of already kind of what it was going to sound like, kind of and then you kind of were doing processing to maximize that? What was your kind of your workflow on that?
Mostly we got sounds that day in a kind of, I would call it a generic good sound, like on the drums and the bass is like kind of a generic good, it's like, hey, on the bass, we're going to use the 4K because we want the Jensen transformer. On the toms, we use the Harrison, because I wanted the Jensen transformer, but I also wanted the Harrison EQ on the toms. On the overheads, we use the 9K. It's like you make decisions about frequency response, transformer versus no transformer. When you get into the SSL family, you even think about things like if you want to use the dynamics, do you want the E-Dyne or the 9K super analog channel strip, which was a little different. It was, the dynamic section itself was different. So, you just make choices like that. And then throughout the day, because we had to move around and did move around from genre to genre and groove to groove. So we didn't want to paint ourselves in a corner. So we wanted something that just basically sounded good in the headphones, inspiring to the musicians, but also gave me and the end user room to take these a direction, if that makes sense, when they mix them. Because I'm going to offer these multi-tracks as a download in addition to the ones that I've already offered, and there's more to come. So
absolutely,
yeah. And then there's a couple things I want to show, and that is the fact that dynamics processing isn't just for gain reduction. You're right. There's a tonality. It can almost become EQ-like in a sense. And honestly, the SSL channel strip compressor is one of the ones that comes to my mind in that way. And what I mean by that is if you use the slower attack, the standard attack on it. So it's got two attack speeds, standard and fast. Standard is 30, and I've heard people say it's program dependent. It can be from 20 to 30, whatever it is. It's just, let's just call it 30, right? So that allows some of the transient to come through before it clamps down, which can make the attack sound more prominent, right? And then you can switch to the fast attack, which is like somewhere between 1 and 3 milliseconds, I think, depending on the generation, and that will minimize the transient, right? So you use those to your advantage, and it's like the people that designed those circuits were brilliant, because if you could only pick two numbers, like that's the two, that's the two that are most useful. But what I want to show you is I've got the D510. You mentioned that earlier, right? I've got that rack right here loaded up, as you can see. There's a little camera over here that'll give you some B-roll of it. I've got two B-Dynes, followed by a series of E-Dynes, followed by some Harrison compressors. So what I did, just to show you guys the impact. So there is, by the way, a little EQ on it, as you can see. And when I say a little, you're like, well, those knobs are turned pretty good. But remember, Harrisons are soft, so it's not as much as you think. But here's the raw kick right here. So if I was going to actually mix that as a track, I would definitely be using more attack, right, to make it punchier. But we can also create punch and in a sense the same way EQ can with compression. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to this track here that says SSL in real time. Ready?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's the same. We're hitting the same exact chain right here, right? Yeah. But what we had going on, and I printed this back into the session, so it's not happening in real time. When I use my 510 or any of this glorious stuff you see over here behind me, what I do is I just print it back into the session so it's there forever, right? It's not operating in real time. Get it set the way I want it, print it in, and that way any recalls or anything that I do, hours later to a year later, it's unaffected, if that makes sense, right? Whatever the hardware was achieving is documented for eternity inside of this. But you hear, so that's the standard attack. That's the let's call it 30 milliseconds. So it's letting the click of the attack pop through and then clamping down. And then I'm also, because I love the gate. That's something I think a lot of people don't talk about we all talk about the compressor of the EQ section, or I'm sorry, the compressor of the dynamic section on those classic consoles like 4Ks, 9Ks, even the modern duality. Something that's overlooked is how effective those gates were and still are, right? Even in this era of some of these smart gates, let's call it, in the software world.
Yeah.
The how effectively the SSL dynamic section cuts out the hi-hat bleed of a snare, and the snare from a kick is it's still, that's the sound of the 80s, right? And 90s.
100%.
We were using those things everywhere back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, you can see just how much impact it has in a way that even makes it sounds EQ'd, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't just sound compressed. It sounds like it's EQ'd. That's how powerful, a great analog tool can be.
100%.
And why I have, like, I don't know. I bet you, Jake, I've got 12 channels of Edines, between
Very
here
nice.
and my tracking room. It's because they're great. I want to send processing through them as I can. But that's just how powerful a compressor can be. I'm remembering now. It's probably been a year and a half ago. I filmed a video when these first started. Remember when they relaunched the E-Dine and the B-Dine, maybe 2 years ago, and that's when I started buying mine, started collecting them, and I filmed a video just because I wanted my viewers and my people to see just how powerful those are and why when they hear them in action, I think their mind goes back to some classic records, right? It's like, oh, that's the sound. It is. It's because Bob Clearmountain was mixing half of everything that was on the radio in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And he was doing that on a 4K console with those dynamics. So it becomes a thing. But it wasn't just him. It was virtually everybody, right? And so I show in that video, if you go back on my YouTube channel, I show how to do the Elton John piano thing using those. So I mean, yes, we can crank high end as part of the sound of those really hard hitting piano things. But wait till if you go back and you watch my that YouTube video, wait till you hear the the B-Dine on piano, doing the Elton John thing. Man, it makes it. The hammer, the attack of the hammers hitting the strings is explosive, and you'll be like, oh, that maybe even in software form. If you're like, I can't afford those, well, maybe you can afford the B series dynamics in software form, right? So you can still it's still educational, even if you're not going to purchase any hardware, but yeah, they just had a real impact on sound. We've been kind of talking about the 70s, but when SSL, when Harrison, kind of was such a big player in the 70s and early 80s, and SSL, which is, to me, it's awesome that they're partners now. I love everything about that. But as SSL started coming in with those channel strip compressors on every channel and those EQs, those like the black knobs and the brown knobs and things, you hear into the 80s where the music started really, kind of hitting you in the face, right? The transients become just a big punchy thing. It's really, you can hear the transition of when SSL started making their mark, which is really, I think it's awesome. I think about stuff like that when I listen to oldies and classics, which is fairly frequent. Of course, it's fun. That's one of the things I think about, and I bet a lot of our viewers do too. They think about, was that Neve? Was that SSL? Was that like just that fun stuff? Was that Harrison? It's awesome. I enjoy it.
Like a lot of people's upbringing and being influenced by classic records and stuff like that, particularly kind of the sound of this golden era of bands, Fleetwood Mac, and would love to kind of to deep dive a bit more about that song Dreams that you worked on. The influence of that, and then working again now in the present day, and how much that sound and that signature is kind of relevant in today's workflow for yourself.
It absolutely is. I mean, great drum sounds, great bass sounds, great vocal sounds, when you think about it, in a lot of ways hasn't changed much since 1976 when Rumors was recorded, right? I mean, that snare drum sound is still a great snare drum sound today because, a lot of what's great about those records is it sounds like the instrument, right? Now, in some, like, let's talk about modern pop, we have a tendency to overprocess things a lot, sometimes for effect in ways that's really, really cool. And other times it's like, yeah, maybe the resonance suppression that, that we're using 8 instances of on each track is is turning that that acoustic guitar into a just a rumor of what was an acoustic guitar. Those records sound like those instruments, and that never goes out of style. It literally never goes out of style. It doesn't. There's, whether it's country, whether it's jazz, whether it's pop, in more pure forms of pop, rock. I mean, there's just something about putting a 57 in front of a Marshall and just letting it rip. You know what I mean? And it still
Absolutely.
sounds the same now. Like, we still look back at some Led Zeppelin records and like that drum sound, that guitar sound. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's awesome. I think there's in a lot of ways, as much things have changed, there's also some things that just haven't. I mean, the breakup of a Marshall, for example, is a perfect example of just like, it's never not going to be awesome.
When listening back and hearing kind of the processing that you're doing, obviously you've got a bunch of other stuff happening, but even just hearing the Harrison channel strip, it's like, wow, the EQ just sounds great on it. And I don't know any other EQs that sound the way that Harrison does. And I know we can say like, right, this is a bit of SSL, this is Neve, all right, this has got the character of API and stuff like that. But I don't really hear the question of like, right, this is for sure the kind of the Harrison sound. And I guess kind of question to you, do you share that similar view? Do you kind of, that's not to say like, could you pick up anything and you hear like, right, I know exactly how this is recorded, I know the signal chain, but do you identify that sound with Harrison, do you think?
I do. I think that those EQs are amazing. I really do. I'm gonna give you a little bit of my philosophy. All right. So back in the 70s or the early 80s, they were in a studio, and that console, whatever it was, kind of became the sound of the record in large part, right? I mean, it was contributing across every track basically on the multi-track was that preamp and those line inputs, when they were mixing it, if it was in the same room and things like that. What I like about where we are now, and I say now, this has been going on for years. Look at some of our heroes, right? I mean, Chris Lord-Alge, right? Most of us grew up, come up idolizing him to some degree, and big 4K guy, right? But you look in that rack behind him, and he's not the only one. Michael Brower, when he was mixing on that 9K in New York, and just on and on and on. They had those channel strips doing the heavy lifting, right? That was the main EQ on so much of the record, and it was creating that SSL sound in that event. But what did they always have in the racks behind them? A handful of other options, right? So you have a couple other flavors, whether it be Harrison or anyone else, in the rack behind you for select tracks. And what that diversity is part of making records, it's like ways of moving the needle forward and trying to keep making music better and, reach new heights and reach new heights. Is I found that by diversifying some of my EQs across my mix, because the high frequency, when you boost 10K of a Harrison, undeniably sounds different than 10K on the 4K, right? And undeniably sounds different than using that same amount of boost and that same frequency on a 9K. You mentioned some of the other manufacturers out there, like Moog. I mean, there's tons of EQ circuits out there. Diversifying those between SSL and Harrison and et cetera within a mix, to me, it's one of those things that's opened the door to new heights, because by diversifying that high frequency boost across my mix, all of a sudden, the attack of the acoustic guitar, even though maybe it's boosted in the same area as the attack on the piano, they separate differently, if that makes any sense. I'm a big believer in diversifying my EQ circuits, and Harrison has to be part of that argument in that equation, because it's iconic.
Absolutely. Commenting back on the limitations and the precision and commitment of what guys were doing back in the 70s and 80s, I think it's nice to hear that there's still that prevalence within today's mix, as well. Again, we've got a lot of this variety, but actually we need to kind of turn down the noise a bit, make sure that we've got everything that is coherent and balanced, but also colorful and complementary to the other instrumentation and orchestration that you've got in the mix. And again, I think, Harrison is an excellent product, whether you're looking at plugins or if you're looking at hardware. hell, if you've got a big 32C console in the back for recording and mixing, as you've had some experience on.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that console. When they had to come and get it because it sold. So somebody else has it, is the proud owner now, but we adored that thing. We loved having it.
Let's talk a bit about, your take on a classic hit record, Fleetwood Mac, Dreams. First of all, the performance is out of this world. The vocalist is incredible. The rhythm section, I think even the video production, it just all tied into this really nice music video. And then you went on to kind of explain your mix and your workflow and stuff like that. What was it about that song that kind of thought, hey, let's do this cover? And what kind of led you to that conversation?
I think Stevie's performance, is part of that. There's something about that song. When you talk to people that are rock fans, pop fans, country fans, 60 years old, 16 years old, it doesn't matter. Everyone loves that song, right? It's just one of those that crosses all the boundaries. And I don't know if I know exactly why. She's magic. She always has been. There's just something about the way she conveys a lyric that's magic. But there's also something about that rhythm section. The drums and the bass on that thing bouncing back and forth, and that groove that they're locked into, to me is just still magical. But one of the things about some of these classic productions, we're talking about the golden era, right? And so much of our, the greatest music, I think, still to this day that stands the test of time came from that era. And I wonder sometimes if the limitations wasn't part of the awesomeness. When you think of Fleetwood Mac, they're a perfect example of this. It's like there's no instrument playing at any given time that isn't making a powerful impact on the music, right?
Yeah.
Now, whereas I get a lot of mixes nowadays where there's tons of tracks I have to find a way to mesh together in the background. It's just a barrage of synths and layers of guitars and everything, and our brain can't actually focus on that many things at once, right? There's just a couple things that we can hear on a track and that we're actually cognizant of the fact that it's happening, like the kick and the snare, the lead vocal, and the bass, and then one other like theme chordal element. That science has proven that, right? A lot of that other stuff I'm not saying it's not cool and it's not serving its purpose in some productions and everything, but when you talk about Fleetwood Mac though, it wasn't that way. Like the acoustic guitar didn't even come in until chorus 1, right? It was like the track. It was like there were so few tracks happening on the intro and the first verse, and then on the chorus, all of a sudden, boom! There's that acoustic guitar that comes in, and you it all of a sudden it's a bam, because it was kind of loud too, right? So it was like they the limited tracks on the 16-track machines or 24-track machines that they had of that time. There was only so many lanes open, and people didn't overuse those lanes. Led Zeppelin, like you were mentioning so many names earlier that Harrison is famous for, AC/DC. Think of how unclouded and unclogged those lanes were on those recordings. I'm just gonna say that possibly that's part of the magic. It's because everything is everything that's happening is impactful. It's not just background fodder that's filling some frequency range. It's like everything in a Fleetwood Mac production had a purpose, and I don't think we can say that about a lot of our modern work. And I'm pointing the finger at me as well, because I produce tracks, and there's
myself.
I know there's things as every time I veg on 70s and 80s stuff, or especially early 80s, like Fleetwood Mac. It's a little bit of a production lesson, and I feel like I get my wrist slapped every once in a while, right? It's like Lindsey Buckingham and Ken Caillat are slapping me on the wrist and saying, see? It's like, note to self, I don't have to, everything doesn't have to be stereo, like everything doesn't have to be layered and octave. There's just, we can draw a lot of responses to that statement, but I think you know what I mean, and I think our viewers know what I mean by that.
Let's kind of finish on just a couple of questions regarding, again, the golden era and what we're talking about today.
Okay.
So we were talking about the right tools to use. And from what I gathered from yourself, it's you have this variety of tools and applications to use, but it's about having that kind of quick action and that decision, that commitment, being like, right, this is going to sound good for this artist, for this genre and stuff like that. So since choosing the right tools is such a big part of shaping the sound, do you find that applying golden era thinking helps modern producers develop a recognizable sonic identity, even if genres don't rely on that and rely more on digital production?
I think so, because I still think, first of all, a lot of the stuff we're talking about from this era, the 70s and the early 80s, a lot of that equipment is still out there and is still very, very sought after. I mean, I love the fact that Harrison and SSL are remanufacturing that, it's like to that spec still today. Absolutely love that. But, a lot of our, let's call it our friends aren't, right? You can't get, there's some of that gear that you can get and some of it you can't. Think of an LA3A, for example. I mean, it's that company doesn't even make that product anymore. So they're cherished items that still have a huge impact on music today and across a lot of different genres. And there's no doubt that somebody that's known, well, okay, let's talk about Bob Clearmountain. I mean, one of my heroes. He's probably one of yours too, and one of the most iconic SSL guys of all time. You think about the vocal sound of his records, right? There's two compressors that he will use. It's one or the other. It's either going to be an 1178, which think 1176, or an LA3A. It's one of those. So, what an impact those two pieces of gear. Think about the impact they've had on the history of recorded music. Of us as listeners growing up listening to radio, cassettes, CDs, MP3s, whatever the case may be. Those two circuits on just his records alone, think about the impact that they've had. You know what I mean? When you're thinking about shaping the vocal sound of Bruce Springsteen, Bryan Adams, the Rolling Stones, I mean, it's like drop the mic, right? What more do you say?
Yeah.
What more do you say?
We were mentioning about analog style tools, right? So there's the 32C channel strip, which we've kind of covered quite extensively, and the Tape Saturator. So these tools kind of encourage a bit more tone shaping and I guess commitment and stuff like that. So my friend at SSL has been pleading me to ask this question, to people and stuff. So he's all about automation, right? And if you're working on a console, and you were talking about how like you print, and I think that's a common practice where like you print your processing. So if you need to come back to revisions, you can move something like a dB or so up, and you've got that committed there. Kind of working in the box, how are you kind of translating that organic golden era type of workflow, but working in the box that way?
Well, I do a lot of automation. Automation is a big part of my everyday process, and I think that is part of why I've been successful. Honestly, making sure that every syllable of the lyric is exactly where it needs to be at all times. To hit me emotionally, and a guitar lick or a piano lick or you name it. Anything that's happening in the track at the moment is relevant. Anything that needs to be relevant is right. I'm pushing it up. But you can do that to me even with an Origin or a 32C. I don't see the lack of automation on the console as a problem. We're talking about Rumors, Fleetwood Mac Rumors. They didn't have moving faders on that, right? I mean, there's something charming about moving your hands in real time. Our analog guys in the past, when there was, you could take console tape and lay it out, right, and make marks. This is my verse and this is my chorus. You know what I mean? They used to put like their static levels. They take a pencil and just make a little mark across the console, so you knew where your fader, your static level was. So you can move and return in real time, even without automation. But nowadays we can automate inside of Pro Tools or Logic or whatever. I mean, name your DAW, and the fact that it's pre-dynamic is not a problem to me, because most things we're only moving a dB or two. So when you're talking about a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 ratio that's doing 3 dB of reduction, if we turn that fader up or down 2 dB, I mean, if we actually do the math in our head, are we really? You know what I mean? It's like sometimes we're obsessing over things that we don't need to obsess over because it's not a problem. Now, there are tracks where we are automating heavily, like a lead vocal, for example. I would have that. I would plug my compressor into the channel strip in my DAW. So that way, when I'm automating inside of Pro Tools, I can leave that fader more static, right? Because what I'm doing with my fader, would be in the DAW, right? So meaning that it would be affecting how hard I'm hitting the compressor if I was using the compressor as a channel insert. So what I'd do was use my compressor as a channel insert inside the DAW instead of the console on those faders that I'm going to move a lot. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So for me, a 32C and an Origin and these other consoles that are that don't have an automation system built in, Pro Tools is your automation system. It's not the problem that some of us want to paint it to be. It's like, oh, if I move my fader a dB, what's that doing to my compressor? Do the math. It's not doing almost anything to your compressor. It's only those things we're moving heavily, and so it's not a problem to me to have a lack of an automation system on the console.
Like you say, classic records, they didn't have most motorized faders. They didn't have Pro Tools. So manually writing a fader or, making marks on the tape, and then in the chorus, pushing something up, pushing it down, printing that section, rolling back, that was the early forms of automation in itself, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
We've just been able to get way better at it in real time.
That's true. We're automating to levels that were never existed back then.
Exactly. You can automate plugins engaging and bypassing. You can automate various routing happening, all that kind of stuff. So, I think sometimes people can take it for granted, I suppose. So, yeah. Hopefully this has been useful for listeners out there. I totally recommend, first of all, go watch all of Joe's content. I could probably spend hours just learning bits and pieces and stuff like that. And it's really nice, Joe. Thanks so much to hear more of your philosophy about mixing and working with artists as well. Because, we could talk about all of the plugins that are out there, all the hardware, and we could talk all about the finite details of what goes into it. But actually, real life practical experience is more important. If you can make something sound good, that's what I strive for, at least. So thank you so much for your time. Is there any kind of final things you want to say or comment on?
No, I will applaud you and your team members at SSL Harrison for the forward-thinking products and even when you're connecting to the past, right? Your 32C channel strips, your 4K revival strips, the 9K, getting those back out in the marketplace in a fresh new package. Boxes like Fusion and the Bus Plus that keep moving the needle forward. Keep, putting the dynamics in an Origin. Keep that forward-thinking thing that you guys have and giving the market what they want, which is not what every company does. Keep that stuff up, because those of us that are actually making our living doing this all day, every day, we rely on you guys. So keep it coming. Keep it coming.
Yeah, look, Joe, thanks so much for today. Everybody, go check out the Harrison Audio website. Go check out Joe Carrell's page, his website, and lots of really cool content. Also, just happens to be a really excellent mix and recording engineer as well. So, Joe, thanks so much for your time. And, we'll hopefully see you soon.
All right, man. Take care.